This is the kind of unexpected thing you find when you do experiments. Now, over to the left here, you see that white tube with the coil, and you see a piece of ferrite rod sticking out of it. And the reason that rod is in there is to have more ferrite material than these three stacked toroid forms. All right, these don't have enough inductance. You got to remember they're hollow in the middle, so there's really not enough density to get the frequency change you want. Now, on the other hand, taking a rod of ferrite material, we could, by pulling it out, it should go up in frequency, and it does. So I learned a few things today, and one of them is this open coil like that really likes to pick up noise. And you notice that the display is bobbling all over the place. But on the positive aspect of what I learned today was I ran my Franklin oscillator, which I didn't realize I had two coils in series to get me that low frequency to do the experiments with the Collins. I knew I had done something to the test bed. In other words, I'm going to need a yellow, a T50-6 yellow with 70 turns on it, along with this tuning cap here, my in the frame, this tuning cap here, to be able to go from 2 megahertz to 3 megahertz, and that's what the Collins uses in its PTO. And I realized after running frequency drift tests on each frequency, I did it at 2.5, at 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, as the frequency goes up, the drift becomes more pronounced. And that's because it's using a tuning cap. And as you go up in frequency, very subtle changes in capacitance will change the frequency. Also, I noticed when I put the temperature up in the room, which you'd expect during the day, I get some frequency drift. But if I kept the frequency of the Franklin down at 2.5, after it warmed up, it was within 1 hertz. The digit on the end bobbled. So what I want to do now is I'm going to wind a coil, a T50-6 with 70 turns, and then do 2 megahertz and then 3 megahertz. And I know as I go down in frequency, the unit's going to be more stable. See, the Collins knew that. They knew instead of using a PTO that's higher in frequency, they used the crystal itself, crystal oscillator, and a mixer. And they took the incoming signal, it went through some processing of coils, it went to an amplifier, then it went into the mixer, which had a crystal oscillator on it, and it was running higher in frequency, and that would bump all the frequencies down. So the whole spectrum or band would be lowered, like a block conversion of the frequencies, and that allowed them then to process a lower frequency until they changed it to the IF. And that was genius. They knew they couldn't get an oscillator for the local oscillator to be extremely stable on the radio. So they, instead of the old raise the bridge, they lowered the river. In other words, they knew they couldn't get the bridge rebuilt higher, so then they just dammed the river in one spot and made it go lower when the boats pass. And that's what they did. They realized we can't work with higher frequencies because the tubes heat up, they cause it to drift. So we'll take the incoming frequency and mix it against a crystal oscillator, which is fairly stable. Mix it down in frequency and then work with it. And that's what they did. And that's what I saw. I'm like, okay, it's a dual conversion. And I started copying that. And then the more I got into the Collins unit, the more I wanted to own one. And the whole time I was building this circuit off to the side out of solid state stuff. But I remember I told you about inverse. What happened was when you do that, I used an extra mixer to undo the inverse so I could use the frequency counter from eBay. You got to go back and look at those videos if you want to understand that. But in other words, I was taking the Collins circuitry and modernized it. And I'm still going to do some experiments, but this is basically the end. Unless I get like a big breakthrough, I just want to tell you the PTO does work, but it doesn't have enough range. And that's because those toroid blanks, the T50-6s, the yellow ones, they don't have enough density. And you'd probably have to stack about 5 of them in a row if they were solid in order to make up, you know, something that's the size of this. Now you notice it went up to 5 megacycles. In other words, when we put this all the way in, that coil drops all the way down to 2.8. And that, you know, that's the amount of ferrite material that I would need in my PTO to make it work properly. But that material there isn't mixed to be drift free. See, the yellow, the T50-6 yellow, that's a material that it doesn't expand and contract a lot when temperature changes. So I said, well, let me use that in my PTO. So you got to remember, Collins, they say to the engineer, I need a material mix for this oscillator in this coil that doesn't expand or contract under temperature. We're making a PTO. So someone mixes for maybe an outside company. They bring it back in. They sell the radios. Over so many years, the material actually starts to shrink, and it becomes more dense. And the end points on the PTO get messed up. And you have to actually go in the radio. If you want to fix it, you have to go ahead and take some windings off the coil. That's how they've been fixing it, certain people. So in other words, Collins did screw up in the long term, but it was pure genius what they did in order to get the frequencies they want to receive down in a range that they could work with them. And this is sort of what I'm doing. I'm not copying what they did, only with a solid state. And my PTO, or my oscillator, my Franklin, doesn't drift as much as their PTO because they use tubes. And things have changed a little bit over the years. And you know, when you're using tubes, they get really hot. And that box that they had in on some of the models, they actually have a heater in there. But from the time you turn the radio on, that heater has to bring the temperature up of the components inside the box before the oscillator will stop drifting. And I was trying to, you know, some type of compromise. Now, I noticed that when I turned my Franklin on, when I had the 2 coils in series, at 2.5, when I turned it on, it drifted until it stabilized, but not a lot. It was actually better than the Collins PTO. But you got to remember, the ferrite donuts, the toroid coils, they went around back then. They had the ferrite material, and they knew how to mix it, but nobody ever thought of making a circle, which isn't a dead short. It's genius. A lot of these guys were really smart, and I'm working around like, what can I do? And I want to learn what they did, and by building my experiments, I'm realizing how smart they really were. But I still don't like the AM broadcast band on this radio. What I would have done is put some type of sensitivity control somewhere in the radio. And you put it in the instructions. You say, look, if you're in an area where the locals are really strong, go in and turn this pot. Only for that one band. Instead, they dummied down the AM broadcast band. I got it working really good because I cleaned all those wafer switches and got the amount of sensitivity back up. But it's not a great DXing rig, a tube DXing rig. Now the Collins R390, they have 3 coils in the front end of the AM broadcast band, and I don't know how good it is for DXing, but it looks like they finally got the design correctly. And that's all I got to say. I think that's it. All right, that's it.